لم تتم ولا السلاح ولا المتهمين باختيار في حلول.
مرتزقة الإرهاب الدولي الذين استخدمهم الأسد وعلى رأسهم إرهابيو حزب الله.
Good afternoon. It is Saturday, February 1st. I'm Yumna Naufal, and these are today's headlines. Future Movement announces its intention to stand firm on the concept of rotating ministerial portfolios in a new cabinet. The United Nations Secretary General presses the U.S. and Russia to help ensure that peace talks aimed at stemming Syria's civil war can soon resume. And Ukrainian opposition leaders are to meet John Kerry a day after the U.S. condemns the torture of a protest leader who claims unidentified abductors crucified him. The Future Parliamentary Bloc announces its insistence on a complete and inclusive rotation of ministerial portfolios in the new cabinet. Forming the new cabinet has become a must, and this issue can no longer afford any delay or stalling, the bloc said in a release statement on Friday evening after the MPs' weekly meeting. It called for forming a new cabinet based on the principles said before, and which include rejecting the one-third number of ministers that have a veto power, any political equations in the ministerial policy statement that can obstruct the work of the state, and harm Lebanon's sovereignty. The government formation process has recently made progress, with a majority of factions reaching an initial agreement over an 8-8-8 lineup that crowns each of the March 8 and 14 camps and centrist 8 ministers with rotating portfolios. Washington has reiterated the long-standing advice that U.S. citizens should avoid all travel to Lebanon in light of recent security incidents in the country. U.S. citizens living and working in Lebanon should understand that they accept risks in remaining in Lebanon and should carefully consider those. This supersedes the travel warning issued on October 9, 2013. The Department of State said via Twitter, the potential for death or injury in Lebanon exists in particular due to the increasing frequency of terrorist bombing attacks throughout the country. Now, although there is no evidence these attacks are specifically at U.S. citizens, there is a real possibility of wrong place, wrong time harm to U.S. citizens. It also stressed that because of security concerns, unofficial travel to Lebanon by U.S. government employees and their family members is strictly limited and requires the Department of State's prior approval. The first round of peace talks aimed at ending the civil war in Syria has ended without any significant breakthrough, as rival sides blame each other for lack of progress. At a security conference in Munich, Germany, United Nations Arab League envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, said that while talks between Syria's regime and opposition had made slim progress, they had raised hopes for a solution to the country's civil war. He said that the opposition delegation would be back on February 10th, but President Bashar al-Assad's delegates had told him they would have to check with Damascus before agreeing to return. The opposition wants the talks to focus on a transitional administration it says will remove Assad from power. But the government wants to talk about fighting terrorism, a word it uses to refer to all armed opposition groups. And on the line with us to discuss the most recent developments in Lebanon and the region is As-Salam Party leader, Mr. Roger Edde. Are you with me, Mr. Edde? Can you hear me, Mr. Edde? Okay. So let's move on to coming up next, and we'll come back with our phono. A 102-year-old French cyclist beat his own record with a 27-kilometer ride in only 1 hour. Stay tuned. Welcome back. As we were saying before the break, on the line to discuss the most recent developments in the country and the region is As-Salam Party leader, Mr. Roger Edde. Can you hear me, Mr. Edde?
Yes, very well.
So, to form a cabinet or not to form a cabinet, that is the question. What do you think?
They should, but it's clear that the compromise offered by Sheikh Saad al-Hariri has not produced a government, and the reason is when the Iranians, who are the master players in that game, using Hezbollah and others, they felt two things: weakness from our part, and compromise with the devil is always doesn't pay. It doesn't reward. It rewards the devil. Second, because Iran was upset not to have been included in Geneva II. In fact, they would have been included. It would have not helped anyway.
But you know, we've been talking about Mr. Saad Hariri and the future movement leader, him being the future movement leader. He seems to have softened his stance towards Hezbollah recently. Can you comment on that? Yes,
I am against it 100%. I think he has done that under pressure from Western power, who are wary of a coup d'etat being a threat of a coup d'etat by Hezbollah in Lebanon. And because they are busy with Syria, because they are busy with other issues like the negotiation with Iran, they are pressuring us to compromise. That is the dove approach of a withdrawal leader, a leader that lives a withdrawal syndrome, that is President Obama, who is making us pay the high price here. If I have any advice to the President and to the Prime Minister designate, is they still have time. They still have 2 months to wait for Geneva II, to wait for at least the 15th, 20th of March, and before the date that the parliament is transformed into an electoral body for the presidency, they need to constitute the government of their convictions, which is a government of not national unity, because there is only disunity in Lebanon, for a government that cannot be but a unified government to fill the gap of the presidential election, if there is a gap, and I expect a gap in the election of the next president.
You know, you mentioned Geneva too, and we've mentioned, you know, they just ended the peace talks there, and the envoy for Syria, Mr. Lahar Brahimi, said that there have been little progress made, but that the two sides are still unable to reach a conclusion. So there seems to be no end in sight for Syria. And I know this is affecting Lebanon.
They did not expect, in fact, to have more than some humanitarian relief. They did not even get that humanitarian relief. I think the parties are still testing each other. I believe that there will be more than Geneva 2 and 3 and 4. But anyway, the decision will be made when the deal between Secretary Kerry and President Rouhani is finalized or is undone in May. That means from now to May, we have 2 dates, one for Lebanon, that's the presidential election, which we should forget about. We should have a government that can fill the gap, not a government of division, but a government that takes care of the interest of managing the state and keeping the minimum alive of the state. On the other hand, we have to wait for the Americans in their last attempt with the Iranians to get a deal. If they get a deal, we have a deal everywhere. We have a deal in Syria, we have a deal in Lebanon. There is a relaxation in the relationship with both Russia and Iran at the same time, and we enter another period of détente in the Middle East. Today, the Middle East is a scenario of confrontation between a superpower and power who wants to be troublemakers, like Iran or Russia.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. That was SLM party leader Mr. Roger Edeh commenting on the most recent developments in Lebanon and the region. And moving on with regional news, deposed Egyptian leader Mohamed Morsi returns to court on charges of murder days after he insisted he was the legitimate president at a separate hearing related to a prison break. According to the official state news agency, Morsi arrived at the police academy in Cairo to face charges of inciting his supporters to kill 10 protesters demonstrating near the presidential palace back in December of 2012. He was accompanied by 14 defendants from the now banned Muslim Brotherhood. Most of the charges they face carried the death penalty. Despite a heavy security presence outside the court, a lawyer representing Morsi was mobbed by anti-Morsi protesters as he arrived. Last week, Morsi appeared at the same location charged with colluding with foreign groups to break out of prison during the uprising against Hosni Mubarak in 2011. At that appearance, Morsi insisted he was the legitimate president of the country. Ukrainian opposition leaders are due to meet the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry a day after the U.S. condemned the apparent torture of a protest leader who claims unidentified abductors crucified him. Dmitry Bulatov, age 35, who reemerged on Friday after being missing for a week, said unidentified kidnappers beat him, sliced off part of his ear, and nailed him to a door during his time in captivity. Jay Carney, the White House spokesman, said the U.S. administration was concerned by increasing reports of protesters disappearing and being beaten and tortured, and by attacks on journalists. Carney also said it is especially concerning that some of the reports suggest that Ukrainian security forces have been involved. Ukrainian opposition urged Europe and the U.S. to go beyond vocal support for their fight for more democracy and demand a halt to violence they blame on the president, Viktor Yanukovych.
We have been actively engaged in what's been happening in the Ukraine. Not only has our embassy and our folks who are over there been talking to the opposition as well as the government, but folks like Vice President Biden have spoken directly to President Yanukovych about our belief that, number one, rules that restrict protests and free speech are ultimately counterproductive, and we are very much against. Number two, that there has to be a way to restructure the Ukrainian government in a way that allows the voices of the opposition and those folks on the streets to be heard in preparation for some sort of democratic process that creates a government with greater legitimacy and unity. And that's going to be challenging, but we're trying to help on the negotiations on that. Number three, over the long term, part of what's happened here is that the people of Ukraine clearly are looking to Europe and the West as a partner in a more free market-based economy. Obviously, they also have strong historic ties to Russia.
Finally, Robert Marchand, I'm saying this right, a record-breaking centenarian, cycled into the history books, pedaling almost 27 kilometers in 1 hour at the age of 102. When he was born, the Titanic was still afloat, and the Tour de France was a mere 8 years old, with a former fireman and one-time backpacker easily beat his own record of just over 24 kilometers cycled in an hour, set in 2012. Also, in his 100th year, he earned another place in the record books with a 100-kilometer cycle round a velodrome in Lyon, which he completed in 4 hours and 17 minutes. Through Friday's performance was enough to see him keep his crown in the over hundreds category. Marchand told journalists after the feat that he had not been performing at his best. A huge crowd of fans gathered at the velodrome just outside of Paris to cheer Marchand on with occasional blast of rousing accordion music. Now, after completing the race, he hurried off around the track to meet and greet his supporters. Never give up, that's the thing. And on that note, let me remind you of our headlines. Future Movement announces its intention to stand firm on the concept of rotating ministerial portfolios in a new cabinet. The United Nations Secretary General presses the U.S. and Russia to help ensure that peace talks aimed at stemming Syria's civil war can soon resume. And Ukrainian opposition leaders are to meet John Kerry a day after the U.S. condemns the torture of a protest leader who claims unidentified abductors crucified him. Those are your Saturday headlines live on Future Television. In Beirut, I'm Yumna Naufal, wishing you a great weekend. Take care.
مرتزقة الإرهاب الدولي الذين استخدمهم الأسد وعلى رأسهم إرهابيو حزب الله.